of the Menlo the meeting of the Menlo Park Fire Protection District on January 18th, 2022. I apologize to people who were waiting for the meeting to start. It took us longer to discuss the closed session item than we thought it would, and I apologize for keeping you waiting, but we're ready to start the regular meeting now. We don't need to do a roll call again, do we, Michelle?
I think we do.
Probably do, Chuck.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, okay. I don't hear Michelle. Is she here?
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. We did the roll call before closed session and everybody's still on board, so no changes. I think it's fine to proceed.
Okay, and I don't remember here now.
Can't hear you, Chuck.
Number 2 or just at the end of the meeting?
I'm sorry, I couldn't. Can you repeat that, Director Bernstein?
Yes. Do we have a public comment session now, a public comment agenda item now?
Well, the first thing would be Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance then. If everyone will please stand, I appreciate it. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Director Bernstein? Okay. It looks like we may have temporarily lost Director Bernstein, so stand by.
Rob?
Thank you, Robert.
Hey, just won't.
We will continue.
You got your duties.
I just text Chuck. I hope he comes back up. We're on reportable actions from closed session reported by the president. Stephen, do we have any reportable items?
There's no reportable items now. There is an item on your agenda further down in the agenda to discuss compensation adjustments. You can take it now if you prefer, or at the time when it's specified on your agenda.
Okay, why don't we do it for the specified time? Okay, next we have public comment number 2, Michelle.
If anybody has
Chuck, are
any
you
public,
back?
Yes, I'm back. I
All right,
apologize.
go ahead. Take over, Chuck.
Zoom threw me off because they wanted to know if I was satisfied with the 40-minute limit or something. So I don't know what happened there. But
Go ahead, Chuck.
yeah,
We're on public comment number 2, Chuck.
Okay, thank you. And is there any public comment, Michelle?
if anybody has any public comment, you can raise your hand or you can press *9 on your phone if you called in. I do see one hand. Give me one moment. Lynn, I believe you're free to speak.
Good evening, directors. I'm Lynn Bramlett, and I want to make a comment for the agenda item about the presentation from Constant Associates, but I'll go ahead and read what I have to say right here. I'm the president of MPC Ready, and so I was interviewed for the report. However, many key individuals were not interviewed. I think this report warrants a more interactive discussion, including with stakeholders in the jurisdictions, to discuss the contents and recommendations in more depth. Some of my major concerns include the process was directed by those being reviewed, not the fire board. Fire district employees had early access to findings and the ability to shape the final report. The end customer was the fire district and not the people. The report made multiple factual errors. The report needed a deeper factual review. The report simplistically positioned major problems as communication problems. A major recommendation was to hire more staff to communicate better with stakeholders, such as the volunteer groups. This won't fix problems at the top. I see the fundamental problem as a lack of interest or ability in collaborating. We also lack a shared measurable goal and effective results-oriented team structure and accountability for results. The report accepts the status quo where a few people make decisions for the rest. This includes the idea that the community CERT program should be a catch and release one. There has been no community engagement process. I'm also not invited to the district CERT meetings, although I'm a CERT. I remain deeply concerned about the lack of stakeholder and public input into what the residents and elected officials want to see in our community CERT program and the priorities for disaster preparedness. It's time to examine the focus on a paramilitary style response of first responders, supplemented by perhaps 100 or so members of the community emergency response team. There won't be nearly enough to go around following a disaster. We need to discuss what should be in place based on national policy, disaster social science research, and the widely endorsed standards for emergency management programs. I would like more than 3 minutes to discuss these topics, which I have spent considerable time researching. We can also learn from effective approaches in local jurisdictions, such as in the city of Palo Alto. There are others. Thank you for your time. This concludes my remarks.
Or other public comment, Michelle?
I do not see any other public comments.
Okay, I actually normally would have come after this, the first item, but I let it go on because the first item that we have is the report, so that the comments and the report are the agenda item are juxtaposed here. But normally we would have these early public comments are for items not listed on the agenda normally. I'll move now then to item the presentation item number 1, which is the final report from Constant Associates. And I don't know if we have a staff person. Chief, did you want to introduce the people, or are we going to have somebody else do that?
Certainly I can do that. We have Ryan Dufour from Constant and Associates, who has graciously agreed to visit one of our meetings again. He was present for the E-Prep committee meeting, and at that point there was a request from the fire board that he attend the full board meeting. So Ryan, we really appreciate this. It should be noted that this is going above and beyond what you guys were contractually obligated to do, so we really appreciate you taking the time for this. Director Bernstein, did you want Ryan to give, it's not really a presentation, but he did kind of give a broad overview in the committee meeting, and then he was available for questions. Is that the format you'd like to follow tonight?
That whatever he's prepared to do seems appropriate. So Ryan, please proceed.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening, and congratulations, Director Bernstein, on your new position this year, as well as all the other committee assignments that I'm sure have been discussed over the past that will look different than the ones I was used to. But we just wanted to talk. We're here to mostly answer questions for you all, the directors today, regarding the independent assessment report. What I can do is I can go through kind of quickly our process, some high level points, and then read through the recommendations and clarify some things around the priority level that we clarified in the E-Prep subcommittee that I think it's helpful to re-clarify here. And then I will turn it over to take questions from the board, because again, this was the final deliverable is to you, the board members. So I want to make sure that you all I have either your answers clarified or anything that you didn't understand from our report that we can further kind of explain and make sure that everyone's on the same page with where kind of our perspective came from. So I'll just start with the process. As many of you know from the contract, we conducted 16 total stakeholder interviews. Those stakeholder interviews are across the members of the board, the staff of the fire district, stakeholders from the community at large who were interviewed, and then stakeholders and emergency management liaisons from the 3 jurisdictions that include Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, and Atherton. Our survey response, excuse me, I have a Teams message. If you hear any beeping coming through, I must have some team members who are also working late. Our surveys were open to the public, and we documented 70 partial responses with 39 full responses to the survey as the opportunity to mitigate the issues that people felt as though the community may not get a chance to submit their feedback as well, given that our contract just did not allow us to have unlimited interviews to say, and that we were kind of limited there as well. So that was the way for the public to provide their feedback as well if they weren't identified as critical stakeholders for an interview. We conducted a thorough documentation review with our subject matters experts, Bill Pepler and Keith Harrison, who both have, not both, excuse me, who combined have a 60+ year experience within fire departments and emergency management. In identifying the critical, the needs of the community and the district at large, and I'm going to switch over here. We do believe that we found 5 themes that those 5 themes are support for Menlo Park Fire Protection District's CERT program and other volunteer neighborhood preparedness groups, an increase in the staff's exercise participation at all levels, whether that's with the jurisdictions, with the community groups exercises, or with the county's exercises, clarification of responsibilities with the cities and towns and the County Department of Emergency Management, staffing for the Office of Emergency Management within Menlo, within the Protection District in order to bolster the communication, and clarification of objectives for the Emergency Preparedness Subcommittee. We aim to provide feasible, measurable, and specific strategies that will immediately improve the success of the district and will assist the new fire chief once they are hired on as a document that will help them to see some of the trends and what we find as emergency managers, the recommendations as well. When looking, we didn't find so many issues with how the Fire Protection District was responding and was participating in their emergency management. There's also the special aspect that as a fire protection district and not a fire department working for a city or a town, there are a few more ambiguities and gray areas for which you can operate, but that we found that the Fire Protection District's emergency management was following the guidelines of NFPA 1600, which again is not a standard or a requirement, but again is a best practices laid out by the NFPA, and that many of the large issues around that we found within the fire district, we believe rely on communication issues and what we were calling very solvable issues. There weren't many systematic and structural issues, we believed, but rather communication issues that have lingered for so long and have been so pervasive within the communication around emergency management program that it started to move from the realm of professional into the personal, which is something we write in the document itself. But we believe that there's a high level commitment on all parts, on all stakeholders to really discuss these issues and to bolster and make a really resilient community, that we believe that these issues can be solved by a new fire chief. We believe that taking into account from your own manual for the fire district that the chief is the lead visionary, is really bringing in that strong chief will be a really key part of it. And so now I'll go through and I'll quickly just overview and read through our recommendations. There were 6 total, with 3 coming in 2 parts. So I'll just read them and then I will open it up for questions. And I know you have quite a bit left to talk about, so I want to make sure that I give you that time as well. So the first recommendation is to clearly define the scope of the Fire Protection District CERT program in a dedicated CERT program support plan or standard operating procedure. The second recommendation is to increase the Fire Protection District's presence at county, city, town, and other local exercises to reinforce the understanding of roles, build relationships with the community groups and city emergency management, as well as identify ongoing needs for community preparedness. 3A is to convene a meeting with the Menlo Park City Manager and emergency management staff to reassess the Memorandum of Understanding, which clearly identifies roles for the Fire Protection District and the city. 3B is to advocate for the county DEM to lead efforts to hold signatories on a newly updated joint powers agreement and make sure that there's accountability built in for these responsibilities, as well as ensure adoption of this JPA. Our recommendation 4 is, as part of those JPA and MOU discussions, determine a consistent policy for designating volunteers within the district as disaster service worker volunteers and establish mutual aid agreements that would allow the deployment of DSW volunteers as part of mutual aid deployments. Recommendation 5 is hire additional administrative and support positions within the Office of Emergency Management, given that it's about a year old as a department. This will help to alleviate the concerns regarding lack of resources and bring in new perspectives for these communication between the board, the fire district staff, and the community. And the 6th recommendation is to revisit the Emergency Preparedness Subcommittee's mission, goals, and objectives, and update the Board of Directors policy and procedure manual accordingly to ensure due process is followed and adhered to. Again, we have priority levels set here, and one of the things I wanted to clarify before turning it over to questions is the priority levels don't refer to the things that these shouldn't be done. They're all high priorities, that's why they're recommendations, but they are priorities set against each other, and not only is the priority of how they will increase the help and communication and solve some of those issues, but also part of those high, low, and medium factors is the duration of length. So a high priority generally we say should occur in the 1 to 3 month area, with mediums, with high and mediums also occurring in the 6 to 9 month implementation window, and with low priorities occurring within a year or two from now. And so now I will turn it over to the board to ask me any questions. As I said, I know you have many other things on the agenda today as well.
Okay, I do see a hand from the public, but I'm going to go to our board first and ask for their questions, and then I'll go to the public. Anybody on the board like to comment? Jim, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Mr. Dufour, if you refer to recommendation 3B, there's reference to a joint powers agreement, JPA. JPA is defined in statute, that A can be an agreement, an agency, or an authority. So the reference here, when it talks about joint powers agreement, could you expand on that for me? Is there a joint powers authority or agency?
Yeah, let me pull up that recommendation as well, just to ensure that I'm getting all of the language correct here as well. So give me 1 second as I find that in the document. We have agreement. This isn't, and would you mind just repeating your question so I can make sure that I get it?
Well, in law, again, JPA is commonly refers to, there's an agreement among public agencies to establish an agency and then grant it certain authorities. And that's all kind of broadly referred to as JPA. And as I see it used here, and my understanding of it is, I'm not sure that definition fits the common usage of JPA. There's an agreement among various public agencies to do certain things. but I don't believe that constitutes a JPA, but I could be wrong. That's what I'm asking is,
I believe that's a new, the JPA is a new county document that that has been established there as well. In the San Mateo counties, newly formed DEM or newly renamed. I'm not fully familiar whether if it's been newly formed or just rebranded, but it's the same kind of group. But that includes kind of that attendance and active participation, the active leadership in the development of emergency operations plans, the participation in those San Mateo County Emergency Managers Association meetings, and kind of the alignment with planning efforts from the county's training and exercise group as well. I believe the term JPA is the correct term there, and that's something the county has established.
yeah, I think that needs further examination because I don't think it meets the definition of a JPA as it's commonly used with reference to the government code section. So I would ask that we take a look at that. Again, I think just because it's an agreement among various agencies, I don't believe it rises to a JPA. A JPA has very, defined authorities, and there's generally results in the creation of an agency. And I don't believe that's happened here.
Yeah, we can take a look. We can take a look at that, but that was from information with San Mateo County's DPM when we kind of called them for an interview. We didn't use them as a formal interview, but we called them to just kind of update us on the project of DEM and how DEM can factor in, given that all three of the jurisdictions mostly reside within San Mateo County. So
Thank
we
you.
can follow up and discuss that further with DEM as well.
Thank you.
Could you just explain what DEM means? I've never heard of that.
So San Mateo County DEM is the Department of Emergency Management. I believe they have just renamed themselves from the Department of Emergency Services.
I see. Okay, thank you. Other questions? I've got so many participants, it's hard for me to see all the hands here. So let me go back
Chuck?
to the board. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. I'll lower my hand here. Ryan, thank you for interviewing me during the process at the later part of the process. I appreciate you asking for my feedback in it. And one of the things in the report that I didn't see, and maybe you can help me with that, Ryan, is the California statutory requirement for the DSW authority. Can our fire district provide that DSW authority through the state of California?
So that is a part of the discussion of, let me find the recommendation. That's a great question. The fire district is not able to provide that DSW legality. It must be done within the jurisdiction. I know that was one of the big pushes that you all wanted to ensure that there was some aspect of the DSW. But what we found is you would need to create either another MOU with the different jurisdictions to be legally able to activate that DSW. I believe it was us, Director Solano, when we discussed that kind of, in an emergency, the borders start to fall away, but there are a number of insurance questions within the jurisdictions themselves that make that difficult. So what the district would need to do there, if that's something you wanted to pursue with the DSW volunteers, is you would need to pursue a memorandum of understanding that would allow for the district to run that disaster service worker volunteer operation and also give them the ability to activate DSW volunteers from, for example, DSW volunteers from Atherton for an emergency in, say, Menlo Park or East Palo Alto. It is up to the legality of the jurisdictions, and so that may be something that might be difficult given cities' different insurance requirements around that. That was also something. Oh, go ahead, Director Solano.
Yeah, to follow up with that, Ryan, Can the cities and town that we serve and the county, can they set up an MOU or an agreement to give the ultimate responsibility in a disaster for, let's say, the southern part of San Mateo County to the fire district itself, even though we're a special district?
We believe so. However, we also believe there may be the feasibility is the concern there. The legality we believe is correct, and that was Keith Harrison, and I can always connect Keith Harrison with you. Not the legality, excuse me, the legalese and the approval. The feasibility, it is possible. The feasibility of the legality of it may be difficult just given the approval, and it may, that was the tough part we were finding when we were researching that, is we just don't know if it's feasible that Menlo Park would want to do that, or if East Palo Alto, and I know this is recording, I don't mean to call out any jurisdiction in particular. We didn't have those larger conversations with them, but that one of the jurisdictions to activate other disaster service volunteers, there is just that insurance requirement that may hurt the feasibility of that occurring. But it is legal.
Chuck, I just have one more follow-up with that same subject, if it's
Please go
okay.
ahead. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Now, that is huge to me. It's huge to me that, one, that the cities and towns have the ultimate responsibility, and we're tasked with providing an Office of Emergency Management, okay, that doesn't have any jurisdictional responsibility. And as of the DSW requirement, and we're not covering these volunteers through the fire district, I think that's a huge legal problem for us. So those are two, really, Ryan, those are huge issues to me. And would really, a lot of this here, like the NFPA involved in 1600 involving volunteers, I'd like to see our new fire chief get our OEM division or group some way certified or accredited through the NFPA or some type of an accreditation process to validate the OEM section or division of our fire district. So I have a lot of questions, and it was, a very extensive report. You had used the two special districts as examples, and I still have a question about some of those cities that delegate some of their responsibilities, but it's kind of vague relative to the DSW type jurisdictional responsibility. So I like to, when our new chief comes here, to totally look into this and, work with the cities and towns that we have the authority as a special district for their fire services, and to come up with some type of workable solution, which is what was one of your recommendations, Ryan. So, you're kind of saying the same thing I am, but you're kind of peripherally opening the door a little bit, and I'm trying to rush in. I just want an answer to some of these questions.
And Director Solano, I will give you one more clarifying thing around this. Is it would be much easier to create an MOU or an agreement with around the disaster volunteer workers if you wanted to send that, to have authority to activate them for their own jurisdictions. The difficulty just comes in when you have to activate for example, an East Palo Alto disaster service worker volunteer to go to Atherton or to go to Menlo Park. That's where the difficulty is. It would be a pretty straightforward agreement to kind of have that activation power in the event of an emergency to assist in the activation of disaster service worker volunteers.
Right. Yeah. We're kind of talking the same thing. And, I would just like a coordinated effort. So we have all these volunteers that want to help, and we just need to coordinate them appropriately. and protect them, legally relative to insurance issues and stuff. So thank you, Chuck. That's all I have for now, Chuck. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members? I have a couple questions, but I wanted to defer to other board members first. Anybody else? Okay, Ryan, I have two questions, and I think the basic thing I was looking for from this report is kind of what the title was, and that is an assessment. And after going through the whole thing, and let me say, I wanted to find out if we're being effective in what we're doing. Are the volunteers being effective in what they do? Is the district being effective in what it does? In the district, I mean, the Office of Emergency Management. But I can't find anything in here that deals with effectiveness in terms of the mission and so forth. Did I miss something, or is there an attachment, or is there an appendix or something where we talk about what kind of a job is being done by these various components?
You are not missing anything. There is, that is the 56 pages of the document you have is the full document. So that is the full document. I want to say that I do believe we have assessed the fire district. You can find quite a bit of assessment in the current state of the fire district section. The issues we found were not the issues we found around communication and that kind of work are hampering effectiveness, I would say. I think we talk about that as well, but given that there are, those are kind of that's kind of the big issues we found. Let me pull up the document again. And sorry, it just means I can't see your face. But the district is being effective, but I guess what we would say is that we find that the lack of kind of the turnover and the almost the lack of retention and the moving in different directions is kind of causing things to not get off the ground quite in the right way. And that's our assessment, is that move from CCM, that move from the VOAD, that adjustment and change. There isn't quite a bit of enough time to build the infrastructure over the past decade or so. However, we didn't, and in our assessment, we also don't find, we worked with the data we were given, and like we said, the staff is meeting all requirements. You are very much in line with many of the results of the NFPA 1600. And while that isn't exactly discussed in the report, we wanted to focus more on the kind of critical assessments that we thought as a company would and as a project team would help to bolster. So I don't know if that answers your question. If you have any more clarifying questions around assessment, something that I can help clarify here. We didn't just given the project, there wasn't the best way to take a quantitative approach we thought would have really done a disservice to the district. And so we decided early on to take a qualitative approach with those quantitative numbers mixed in from the survey analysis, but that you really needed a qualitative because a lot of things were working well, but the communication and the, like we talked about, some of just the relationships themselves really needed to be discussed and dissected and kind of brought to the forefront in terms of areas of improvement. There are also, I would say, quite a number of strengths we talk about throughout. We do believe you're meeting a number of your key pillars, and we talk about that in the current state section, but it wasn't the typical assessment there around per se, like response time. We weren't doing that quite because we were focused only on the emergency management services.
But my second question is kind of a little more into a lower level there. In several places in the report, I seem to read that, in your opinion, COVID-19 was kind of an excuse for things not being accomplished. And I'm wondering why that would be a valid excuse. It almost seems ironic in a way to say, here's the Office of Emergency Preparedness or Office of Emergency Management that is paralyzed by an emergency. And
Yeah, and I don't think I hope it doesn't come across that we're using COVID-19 as an excuse for any reason or for any, and again, we did provide an independent assessment. So there isn't so much an excuse, but rather COVID-19 occurred at the same time as the beginning of OEM and the OEM's founding and establishment. So what we find there is the lack of ability to do in-person trainings, the lack of ability to participate in full-scale functional exercises at the county. We know the county canceled some exercises. We know across the country exercises were completely canceled, and this includes both tabletop exercises and full-scale exercises. And so what it is not an excuse, but it's essentially OEM has, in its founding, it did not have that time to exercise with the necessary participants, to no fault of anyone's, but an unsolvable pandemic that limited in-person engagement. Trainings had to be hampered and adjusted across, and with COVID-19, we see that across the entire country on a multitude of our projects, is just kind of that inability to begin those critical in-person trainings that assist, those critical exercises. And so COVID-19 is not an excuse, but something to say, as you continue to look forward with OEM, it'll be critical for their participation in those to show these things we can't quite measure yet. If they come back and this year, once Omicron dies down and projects begin, I know we have a number of exercises coming up that we're contracted with, so we know that they're building back up again. Their participation in those exercises will be critical for results-based analysis.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Let me check one more time, and then I'm going to go to public comment. Any more board members have comments that they would like to make or questions? Go ahead, Rob.
I have a question. Well, it's more of a comment because we have more meat on this lamb than we can actually chew off tonight. And I think that's why we got the Emergency Preparedness Committee. Hopefully the board authorized to move forward with getting into the meat of this report and then having the ability to report back to the full board after we have had a chance to really digest and to sort out and to pull together a game plan, because there are some fundamental issues that really need to get addressed. And for me, it's revert back to, and I was able to pull up a report that came out back in June of 2015. I think you're familiar with that report, President Bernstein. It had to do with the Citizen Emergency Preparedness Strategic Plan. And that plan in and of itself talks about a fundamental thing with working with, and that thing is emergency preparedness with the community in terms of getting the volunteers prepared within their community to be able to respond to a disaster in their community with the support of their local jurisdiction as well as the fire district. That is the essence of to me, what that particular strategic plan is. And there are some quantitative things and qualitative things that came out of the report that can that can connect the dots. But I think we really need to look at how are we going to do the fundamental thing about that this report, that strategic planning report talked about, and the report that we got from Ryan them, how to merge those two together in a cohesive way, that there is a plan. When a disaster hit, the CERT volunteers that are on the ground in the community have to take care of themselves and their neighbor. What else can they do to facilitate that particular city? And before anyone gonna go out of their particular neighborhood or out of their city, they're gonna have to make sure, reassure themselves that everything is okay at home. And I think that's when we start talking about going outside of our own self-activation to a volunteer call up group of people for that particular city. That's where the DSW and stuff come into play. And if we're going to get called out of our area to go somewhere else under the auspices of the fire district or OM, emergency office management for the district, then those relationships, those agreements have to be in place and everybody have to agree upon. So there's a lot of work there to even get to that point, as we know, working with the city. So I'm looking forward to sitting down with Ryan and Andre and the citizen group to kind of really organize what's here and look to see where the gaps are and fill those so that we can have a complete, at the end of the day, a strategic plan for the community and for the district. I'm done.
I think the report could have made more of a distinction between the two missions of CERT insofar as one is that self-activating the first 2 to 4 to 8 hours after a disaster, where people are on their own and they're helping their neighbors and so forth to assess the problems and to get immediate aid to people. The more complex thing and the more bureaucratic thing is the so-called deployments, where people are doing things at the direction of professionals. And that doesn't happen until perhaps day 2 or something of that sort. And those are very different missions, in my opinion. But so I think the idea of having a plan that looks at all of that really does make sense. So I hope your committee will be able to do that, assuming that you are in emergency preparedness as I've recommended. Jim, go ahead, please.
Just I have a few comments I'd like to make, Chuck. I found this study to be lacking in terms of assessment. Right, specifically on page 33. The analysis, that the paragraph that follows talks about, that the OEM was diverted from concentrating on citizen groups by COVID-19 pandemic and the recent CZU lightning complex fires. That was more than a year ago, and that's repeated in the last paragraph, talking about the CZU lightning complex response. So I found it to be very short in terms of analysis and assessment of, it makes references to successes, but doesn't really define the successes and doesn't really assess their effectiveness within the community. And just one other comment that I want to make that I found somewhat egregious. On page 11, the last paragraph, in fact, the last
Jim, which pages are you referring to? I couldn't quite.
Of the report.
I know, but there's 2 page numbers. Are you talking about the staff report or the report?
No, the actual consultant report.
In the right-hand corner?
Correct, the lower right-hand corner, page 11.
Okay, thank you.
The last 2 sentences of that paragraph, and I'll just take a moment and read it. The district has made clear, both in interviews for this assessment and in the strategic plan, that they do not believe it is their responsibility to justify every decision to the public. But in this instance, it may have alleviated tensions to explain how the district was assisting, and that should be a temporary measure. I don't know how, that seems like such a far, broad reaching statement to say the district has made it clear that they do not believe it is their responsibility to justify every decision to the public. I find that, I don't know what point is being made. I don't know, I don't find it accurate at all. I think this board certainly has a policy of responding to citizen concerns about any decision that's made. So There are a number of other, and I won't take time to read them, but really broad statements like that I think lack any foundation or basis. They seem to be the product of opinion. Whose opinion, I'm not certain, but overall, I'll just say I found it to be, I don't think it's ready for publication. I won't be voting to accept it. Thank you.
Director McLaughlin, just one clarifying point. That is, while it is not a direct quote, as you can see, it is directly pulled from the strategic plan itself for the fire district. That is where we got the wording around the clarifying words that around the wording there.
I'm sorry, could you be specific, or are you talking about reference to not justify every
section
decision?
you just read around on page 11 in the strategic plan for the district, there is a section that says that there isn't a responsibility to justify every decision to the public. So I'm not sure. It was the most updated strategic plan that we read that from and pulled that quote from, but that is where we got that information.
Can I ask a piggyback question on that, Chuck? Because
Virginia,
I actually,
Virginia, could you wait? I want to make sure that Jim is done.
oh
No,
yeah,
I'm done.
sorry.
I'm done, thank you.
Okay, Virginia, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
so yeah, Jim, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I actually had that bottom, it's basically the bottom of that page completely underlined as well. So Ryan, are you saying this is the district, not the board strategic plan? What is the strategic plan that you're using?
I believe that would be I believe the last time it was
this-
updated 2019, and anyone from the district staff as well who has further information, make sure that I'm giving the proper information. But that is from the fire district strategic.
Right, but okay. Right, with the staff.
Yes, I believe that is the fire district staff strategic plan, not the board strategic.
That's correct, because I would never have put that in there. Everything we do should be justified to the, for the public in some way, shape or form. I mean, we may not agree, but the dollars that we use are tax dollars. And I think this board should always be mindful of that. And the staff should be mindful that the taxpayers of this district pay for the operations of this district, right? And so that's why, I mean, I don't know, Jim, I don't want to speak for you, but it's just ironic that you had that same section that you brought up, that because that's the one area that really, that's the one section that bothered me in terms of wording. And it bothers me that it is something that is actually in the fire district's strategic plan with staff. So I'm kind of with you on that, Jim, in terms of it's not ready for full steam ahead until I understand what that means, because I think that a lot of the processes that we're looking at is kind of fraught, and if this is the philosophy, that explains why I've been concerned about some of the outcomes.
Well, I'd like to add my comment here too. I also had noted that, but I don't think it's just an objectionable statement or a mistaken statement. I think it's a true statement that represents the beliefs of some staff members with which I disagree strongly. And I think if we want to look at the source of communication problems between, say, the board and staff, it is because the staff feels that they are an island unto themselves and they do what they damn well please. And the public be damned, and elected officials obviously have to be more responsive to the public than that. So I think, in fact, this is a statement of difference, and an important statement. And I hope we can change that, or change the staff, or do something so that no longer represents the attitude of the prevailing attitude. I find that attitude, by the way, not just in the fire district, but in many government agencies and so forth. And it is a common thing that the staff rule the world. Yes, I find it not so much an objectionable statement as an objectionable position. Okay, I'm going to go now then, if there's no more comments from the staff, I'm going to go to the public. I do see, Michelle, I'm going to ask your help because there's, again, so many people on here. I can't view them all at once, but I saw Sean Ballard's hand up, and I don't know if he's permitted to speak or not. Can you give him the right to speak? He did have.
If he still has a public comment, he took his hand down. So if anybody has any public comment, please raise your hand now. Or if you called in, you can press *9 on your phone. And now would be the time to do that. Okay, Director Bernstein, I see no raised hands.
Okay, well, I hope Sean didn't step away from his machine for a moment while we were discussing this. Okay, well, I think, Ryan, thank you for attending our meeting. You've given us quite a long, your presence here for a long time, so thank you for that. And I'm sure there will be more questions as time goes on, and that we'll try to direct them to you and so forth.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say before I go, Michelle has all my contact information for you all directors. If you have any question, I'm not sure if you're all referred to as directors or for the board, and regardless, Michelle has all that information. So if you have any additional questions, if you would like to hop on the phone with me, send a long email, I'm available to you through Michelle there. And I want to thank you all, many of you who are on the call, not just the board of directors, but the staff, the volunteer organizations, for your participation. All of you have an immense commitment to the district, at least as Constance sees it. And we do hope that our document will provide a really strong jumping off point, as well as an ability for you all to begin to kind of communicate those things on which you disagree, because the one thing you all agree on regardless is your commitment to the resiliency of the community at large. And that's something where it's nice to see a district so committed. So thank you all so much. And I will go on mute and off camera. Have a great rest of your evening and meeting as well.
Thank you for the kind words.
Thanks, Brian.
Chief, can we move to item number 2, please, your report?
Yes, sir, Director. And I would just like to opine very quickly that I had also highlighted that sentence at the bottom of page 11, and I found it concerning, to say the least, that that was in any way in practice, and certainly if it's written down somewhere, and I will not pretend to know every line of this strategic plan, but that's my first order of business tomorrow, is to figure out where that is and in what context, and address that first thing tomorrow. So Fire Chief's report, thank you for the opportunity. I just want to give you guys a brief update on some of the more interesting things we have going on. First of all, entry-level firefighter hiring. We currently are looking at 8 new hires to get up to the FTE 106 number that has been approved. We have 3 hires completely done with their background process, and 5 of them are in the process. 7 of the new hires will go to the County Fire Academy starting in early March, and 1 of the new hires is coming from a neighboring agency, and so does not need to go through the County Academy and paramedic accreditation and some of those other steps. He's going to do a shorter process and go more quickly onto the line. We also have an open hiring right now for a mechanics position. As you recall, our fleet supervisor, Steve Strom, retired at the end, towards the end of last year. Rudy Torres has been tested for and has been appointed to the fleet supervisor position to take Steve's place. Rudy is still basically working in the mechanics role right now. As of this morning, we have 10 applicants, and it closes in about a week. So we do hope to fill that position fairly quickly. Obviously, without a fully staffed shop, things can seize up and stop rolling pretty quickly. So that's one thing that we take very seriously, is making sure that the equipment is maintained. And we've got some great folks working out there, and we're looking to add 1 more to that workforce. One of the most pressing things we've had happen in the last few weeks, as I'm sure will not be a surprise to anybody, has been the COVID uptick / outbreak. Coincidentally, Chief Schaefer left on the 23rd, and on the 24th, we started experiencing a pretty significant increase in COVID cases. Since the Christmas Eve, we've had a total of 37 employees out at one time or another due to exclusion from work for COVID, positive tests, and 1 or 2 were considered exposures and were off for a short amount of time also. The good news is, as of this morning, we are down to only 3 employees out. The highest number we had was on January 2nd, which was 18 employees that were out with COVID. Obviously, the concern there was to interrupt that upward trend that occurred right around New Year's. It started getting a little bit close to having operational impact. Fortunately, we did not get there. One thing we did implement starting on January 1st was mandatory rapid antigen testing for all employees. For the line folks, when they came to work for their tour and or for overtime or backfill purposes, they were tested at the door. And for administrative people, it was the beginning of their work week. I'd like to say that that was successful in bringing those numbers way down. We actually did identify, I'd say at least 10, if not more, employees who tested positive, were excluded from the workforce, and then became ill over the next 1 or 2 days. So the rapid testing did serve its purpose. We were able to identify anybody who was coming into the facilities for the fire district who may be positive and get them out before they became symptomatic and spent time with other employees. So that's been helpful so far. We are monitoring the rest of the county. The other fire agencies seem to be a little bit behind us on that curve. They're still having more of those higher numbers that similar to what we had about 2 weeks ago. But thus far, we seem to be getting our numbers back down, and that's obviously a good trend. We did not impact no calls were missed. We didn't have any major operational impacts due to the COVID outbreak, but it did get a little bit close. So at the risk of forgetting a few people, I do want to make sure that I recognize some folks who were really instrumental in the COVID response that we had here. The association leadership, Captains Vidosh and White, they were instrumental in getting the testing off the ground. They actually told us that any employees that give us any pushback about doing mandatory testing to refer them to those 2 gentlemen and they would handle it, and they did. We never heard a single complaint from any of the employees. 2400 president and one of our battalion chiefs, John Wardinger, he went to so far that he actually contacted the 95th WMD civil support team in Hayward and got us our testing kits. And so he pulled that one out of his bag of tricks. Our HR staff has obviously been inundated with all kinds of workers' comp claims and exposure reporting and all that. So they've been working triple time to process all of those. The battalion chiefs, at this point, we don't have single testing kits. They're still back ordered, but we have bulk testing. And so the battalion chiefs every morning are driving the entire fire district and testing all the employees. So they hit the road about 7 o'clock in the morning and they're out on the road till about 9 before they get back to their stations. The one person I really need to mention is our infection control officer and EMS manager, Melanie Stars. I don't think Melanie has had a day off in a year and a half, 2 years. I know that during the holiday break was when this all started happening. I know she spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day when she had her family at the house in her back office dealing with cases and contact tracing for both of those days. And that didn't stop. She's really been working hard and doing an excellent job for us. Major Alex Efros, I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name. He's the commander of the 95th CST in Hayward. And again, those guys, it is within their mission statement as Air National and Army National Guard to support civil authorities, but they've been absolutely amazing to us with supplying kits, being super responsive. They're already, if we do wind up getting a USAR deployment, they're going to come and handle all the rapid and antigen testing for our responders to help us get out the door. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge those folks. A big concern, and it was on a number of the committee, came up on a number of the committee meetings, and obviously we have to be cautious to not talk about or get direction or communicate too much on the same topic on multiple committee meetings. So I just wanted to include in the fire chief's report the ambulance staffing. Again, it's been kind of, it has been impacted due to COVID, and that's kind of multifaceted. Paramedic schools reduced the number of students they were putting out the last year due to distancing and closing down schools for COVID. So that reduced the number of employees that our transporting ambulance company, AMR, has to pick from. So that impacted them a little bit. Every Thursday, there's a fire chiefs meeting with county EMS. Our emergency rooms in the county have roughly doubled from about 350 to 400 ER visits a day to in the 700s and 800s, and that is attributed to people spontaneously or self-transporting to the hospital and just kind of backing up the emergency rooms. And then, of course, the hospitals have their own staffing issues with COVID and within their own workforce. And then AMR, our transporting company for the ambulances, has also had some impact to their workforce. We're getting through it. We're keeping a very close eye on it. We have not seen an uptick necessarily in non-advanced life support ambulances. The plan is that if they run out of ambulances or paramedics, we would start getting EMT ambulances, and that may impact our operation because then the fire engine paramedic has to go to the hospital with the patient, which means that we're then delayed in getting back in the service for the next call here for our citizens. But again, we're keeping a very close eye on that, and it has not. We're prepared for it to get worse, but it hasn't been too bad yet. We have 3 notable incidents in the last 2 weeks. 3 structure fires. I believe the fire board is aware of the fire on Hermosa. I sent you guys an email with some of the specifics. That was on January 3rd. We had a mobile home fire on East Bay Shore and East Palo Alto last Friday, which displaced a family. And then we had a fire this afternoon in Atherton on Amador, again, displaced 1 person. And that was a cooking fire that got into the cabinets and then ran through the attic. So we've had each of our towns and cities have each had 1 fire in the last 2 weeks, and they were all handled at single alarm. We did get auto aid for Redwood City, Woodside, American Medical Response, and the 2 structure fires, the structure fire in Atherton and the one in Menlo Park, both had the UAS program. Today, I believe Mr. Owen and Chief Calvert and Captain Denenbaum were actually having a UAS meeting when the fire came in through dispatch. So the van, I think, was there in Atherton before some of the fire engines arrived, and it was very helpful. They were able to fly the infrared platform, and we were able to see where the fire had gone through the attic and be able to target overhaul to make sure we got all the hot spots. That concludes my fire chief's report. If that was more information than you're used to, I apologize. If you want more information, fire away.
Any questions? Virginia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for this report. I just want to, if you could please convey my thanks to Melanie Starr, who I think is a star. She's been ever since this whole pandemic out, actually even before then, when we were dealing with the ambulance JPA, she was right there, and she's just been nonstop. And I know it's her job, but I think she's gone above and beyond. And just please tell her thank you. And for the crews who've been involved with all of these fires, I know just please thank them as well. It's never easy. And I think it was kind of during that weird holiday window still. So please thank them as well. And thanks for your report. This whole situation, it sounds like the COVID situation is under control now. Is that correct?
That is correct. We sort of pushed the pendulum to the other side where it had been earlier with almost lockdown. We stopped multi-company training, which we just today decided we're going to resume, allowing the crews to get together and train outside. Obviously, that's if you can't train, then you start losing your skills pretty quickly. So that's been reinstated. But yes, I do believe that we're at least through that initial surge that we had. We've actually gotten 34 people back that had run the process of the disease or the illness. And so my concern is that before we started getting people back from the illness, we would have too many people going out. Again, I think we dodged the bullet there. The testing and all of Melanie's works and other infection control officers and kind of the whole of the district from top to bottom and side to side really banded together to get us through that couple of weeks there. And hopefully we're through the worst of it. Director Crowley.
Sorry, can y'all hear me? Sorry about that. So do you think that this will help encourage those who are not vaccinated to become vaccinated? Or, I mean, not that you would know the answer to me, obviously it's personal choice, but I'm hoping that might be the case. So, I mean, there's really no question there, but I don't know, are y'all doing anything to encourage those who are not vaccinated to be vaccinated?
Yeah, we've always been encouraging people to get the vaccinations. We did go back to the county and get boosters. So I believe, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I believe Melanie has boosters on hand here again. For the folks that declined the boosters, that was roughly August, September, we were offered the boosters and some folks declined them. They'd already had the first 2 shots, but we're getting the boosters now here at Station 1 to be able to do boosters for folks that want them.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your report, Chief.
Thank you, Director.
Robert was second, and that'll go to you, Jim, third.
Yes, Chief Cole, could you, 2 questions, and it's piggyback on the second question on Virginia's comment. How many, I know at one point last year, sometime everyone had to take a survey of who was vaccinated, who was not. Of the 35 employees that were had tested positive for COVID, how many of those were non-vaccinated individuals? And that's the first question. That's a simple question. So if you got the answer there, you can do that now, because the other one may be a little bit more complex.
Okay,
And
I'll take the easy one first then, if that's okay.
yeah.
So the numbers that we had were basically followed the same percentage. So if we considered that we had about 80% of our workforce was vaccinated, it's been about 80% of our positive cases have also been vaccinated. I won't opine on who's getting more or less ill from it, but it's basically been slightly higher. So basically the non-vaccinated make up 20% of our workforce. They make up 26% of our positive cases. That was as of last Thursday. I apologize, I don't have, we have to be careful with the vaccination records. Obviously, it's protected information in many cases. But that was an interesting thing. That was one of the first things I looked into, if there's any correlation between vaccination status and people testing positive. And it seemed to be roughly equal for both groups.
The second question, it may not be complex, but do you have a handle on really what would be a contributing factor to the upsurge of the 35 cases of testing positive? With any of that, some or all relates to the calls that they are going out on, or is it they're bringing it from home into the fire district?
My sense, I believe that it initially came from outside the fire district, whether that was it was from a call or something from home. It was at a particular station on Christmas Eve where an employee didn't feel well. He was testing. He did not want to go home and generate force packs for another employee on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. He was trying to do what at the time seemed like the right thing to do. And again, he was testing and it was coming back negative. By Christmas Day, he was testing positive. He tested positive. We obviously immediately excluded him from the workforce. And within a day, the crew that he'd been working with at that station, the people that shared his bedroom and his seat on the apparatus, we started getting, it was what we called hotspots, or actually I believe it was technically considered outbreak locations. And so at one point early in this year, around New Year's, 3 of our fire stations were considered outbreak sites. And you could almost, you could see it kind of moving within 2 or 3 days. The people that had worked with folks that had been ill were starting to get ill. And that's one of the reasons why we sort of went out on a limb a little bit and started that mandatory testing, was to be able to catch those cases prior to those folks being around other people for extended amounts of time. And I do believe that was at least partly to help with the downturn that we get.
One last posing question. And once there has been an identification of, hey, this person either feel ill or maybe tested, and it found that it came back that it was positive. At that point, were they sent home, or were they self-isolated somewhere at the fire station? What is the the emergency response, if I may add, to that situation in terms of how we're dealing with it.
So early on during COVID, this may be where your question is coming from. We actually had some plans to keep people who were positive and isolate them at work. With the sheer number that we've had, when the people test positive and or become symptomatic, we are basically excluding them from the workforce. And what they do at that point, we couldn't support 22, at this point, 37 people needing to be isolated for at least 5 days. So they were, I think I've heard that people did all kinds of things. Some people went home and just isolated in their bedroom. Some people got hotel rooms and that type of thing. But we did not offer at that point, with the sheer number that we had, we were not supporting people that were sent home from work as far as a place to stay and isolate.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, you had a question.
Chuck, I'm going to save my comments until reports and requests section later. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question. I have actually a question and a comment. In terms of the new hires that are in the process, you have the 8 candidates who are in the recruiting process, and then this one lateral. I was curious how many of them are paramedics?
5. I believe it's 5 of the 8 are paramedics. We wanted to hire all paramedics when we got through the pool of candidates, and this was Chief Schaefer handled all this process, but we did end up with 3 EMTs, which I think is fine. If we continue to have a roughly half to 60% of our new hires be paramedics, that gives us adequate flexibility on the daily roster to make things work.
And what about the lateral?
The lateral is a paramedic, yes, sir. I'm sorry if I misspoke. It's 8 total, so 7 new entry levels and 1. We're calling him a lateral. It was an entry level hiring, but again, he's coming to us from a neighboring agency with, I think, 5 or 6 years of experience, and he's already a county transporting paramedic, and obviously we're really lucky to have him.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
I missed your answer. It cut out when you said the lateral was a paramedic, and then you added on something. Could you repeat that?
He's a lateral coming to us from a neighboring fire agency who has, I think it's about 5 years experience, and he's already a county paramedic. The agency is coming to us from also transport, so he's got ambulance experience as well.
Okay. And then with respect to the COVID, I would like to just share a really quick comparison here. And I know that I'm perhaps beating a dead horse. I was unable to convince other board members to vote for mandatory vaccination. But I just wanted to tell you that my organization is, we have about 100 employees. Every day we serve on site between 350 and 400 children. So there's a lot of on-site thing. And we have not had, since the pandemic began, a single case of on-site transmission of COVID at all. Not a single case. We've had some teachers who've gotten sick. We've had some children who have gotten sick, and they've actually exposed other people, and we did the quarantines and so forth. But nobody who was quarantined or who had been exposed ever got sick. And we made almost immediately when vaccinations were available, we made vaccinations mandatory. And so 100% of our staff are vaccinated. And I'm saying that because I applaud the effort to do this antigen testing and so forth. But I would maintain that it's actually the second best thing to do, because for the most part, as you know, first of all, the antigen test is as sensitive as the PCR test. And so the PCR test doesn't pick up typically the first 2 days of being contagious. And the antigen test may not pick up the first 3 or 4 days of being contagious, particularly among vaccinated people who have lesser symptoms. The lesser the symptom, the less sensitive is the antigen test. And so people are exposed for 2, 3, 4 days before it can be determined through testing that they're contagious. I'm saying that again because I still think it would be a wise thing for the district to adopt a mandatory vaccination. I think, anyway, I will leave it at that, just as a parallel situation. And are there any other comments from any board members on the chief's report? Okay, let's move on then to the next item. We have the agenda shows 4 items on the consent calendar. However, item number 6 has been removed, and I'd like to ask Francine to explain what's going on with that item. Francine, are you still on the call?
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and for some reason I can't start my video. I'm trying to unclick it, but it's not. Let me try this. There. Can you see me? No? Okay, so I'm not able to show my video, but I will talk about the master salary schedule. So the master salary schedule is brought before the board when there are changes that are processed in compliance with the MOUs, comp plans, or labor employment agreements. And so there are quite a few changes that were processed in the salary schedule effective January 1, and my staff report identifies those. There was one additional change that was more of a cleanup item that was included in the master salary schedule, but was not identified in the changes for the staff report. And so I'm asking the board if they would like to pull the item, and I can kind of explain that through the HR committee process and bring it back to the board for March. Or I could also explain it to the board now, whatever the preference may be. Any questions? The master salary schedule must be approved in a open public meeting under the California Public Employees under the PEARL labor code. And so this is our process to get the salary schedule approved in the open session meeting for items that were previously negotiated and approved by the board of directors.
Well, I thought we'd agreed that it was going to be withdrawn, and you were going to explain the reasons.
Okay, so if we'd like to withdraw it, so the reason being is that the salary schedule from the last time the unrep management and confidential employees were updated in January of 2021 had an error, and that error, I guess, was held back from prior years, where I think there was the top step of 2 of the classifications. One is the senior management analyst exempt, and one is the senior human resources analyst, was not updated correctly. And so there's a very slight adjustment, which is about, I think it's about 2 cents per hour or $43 a year for the top of the range. And the fraction is about 29/10,000ths of a fraction to align this salary with the district's pay structure. So the district's pay structure and the compensation plan basically approves it's approximately a 50% spread from the top of the range to the bottom of the range. And for some reason, these 2 classifications were off just vary so slightly and continue to be off. And I'm not sure if it was a rounding issue, but this needs to be corrected. It's within the authority of the compensation plan to adjust it. And so we cleaned it up when we were updating the salary schedule, but it wasn't called out like the other substantive changes that were approved in prior comp plans. So this change for these two classifications wouldn't adjust anyone's salary. It's just adjusting the range to align with other like positions in this kind of job class family. There's another position in the salary schedule that has this exact same range. The starting salaries are the same, but the ending salary became off somehow. And so I'd like to clean this up to correct it. And if I need to bring that, to the committees and then back to the board, that is the one change that's not necessarily spelled out. And then the second thing is that there's language that needs to kind of be, I guess, streamlined for how the district's pay structure is defined. The language is a little bit antiquated and not very clear. And so I'd also like to bring the language to the HR committee to kind of define the process of how the district's pay structure is defined.
Given that there was really no downside to delay to bringing this back in February and putting it on the committee agenda, or maybe even two committee agendas in February, it seemed to make sense to pull it tonight so that we make sure that we don't publish anything that we then regret and have to make a change later. So this way we can make sure that it is correct and we don't have to revise it later as we did last month. Yes.
So you want to pull item 6 off the consent. So can I make a motion to approve items 3, 4, and 5 on the consent?
Yes.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve items 3, 4, and 5 on the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you. And do we have a second for that?
Second.
Is that you, Rob?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
So we have a motion from Virginia and a second from Rob for the consent calendar. Any further discussion? Michelle, could you call the roll call vote?
Director Jones,
Yes.
Director Crawley,
Aye.
Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Solano,
Aye.
Director Bernstein.
Aye. Okay, number 3, 4, and 5. And with the board's permission, I'd like to then bring back item 6, postpone it until next meeting. Any objection to doing that?
No, but do you want to direct it to a specific committee back to like HR or whatever first? Or how do you want to do this, or have Francine work on this and bring it back to the February board meeting?
I think there were 2 parts to it, and I've recommended to Francine that she bring it back to 2 committees. There's an issue about the wording that needs clarification and so forth, and the policy, just being clear about the policy of these intervals between steps, and that should go to the HR committee. And then there was actually the chart itself and some adjustments to the calculations that were really corrections of errors. They were small errors, but correction of errors. And I thought that should go to the finance committee.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't know if you want me to make a motion to have that be done via direction, or maybe it's just direction is enough to bring those issues separately to their respective committees.
I mean, if there's an objection, we can certainly discuss that. If there was no objection, I don't think we need a motion, because I think I have at least half the discretion about the agenda items and so forth. And so I'm strongly recommending we just pull that item.
Okay.
Any other comments about that? Okay. Let's move then to the regular agenda. Item number 7 is the consideration of a compensation adjustment for the acting fire chief. This was the item that was the subject of our closed session today. And we have a proposal that is slightly complex in its statement, not in its principle. And if I could ask the our counsel, Stephen Miller, to send it, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So I think you're looking for a motion on the following proposition, and I don't think it's that complicated if I understood your direction, which is to authorize a temporary upgrade pay for Acting Chief Coyle in the amount of 10% of his base salary to take effect beginning with this pay period and lasting through the first pay period in February, to allow for transitional activities to take place once Chief Lorenzen assumes the duties of Fire Chief.
Would somebody like to make a motion to that effect? Jim?
Yeah, I'll be happy to make the motion. Do I need to restate it, or can we use Stephen Miller's description?
I think his description is sufficient.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
moved.
And Rob has seconded the motion. And let me then ask, any of the board members have discussion or comments about it? I will move then to the public to see if the public has any comments on it. Michelle, I can't see all the people at one time here. Can you help me? Are there any
Yes.
comments?
If anybody has any public comment, please raise your hand, or you can press *9 on your phone if you called in. I'll give you a moment. And I see no public comments.
Okay, well, without any further ado then, could we have the roll call vote?
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Crawley,
Aye.
Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Solano,
Aye.
Director Bernstein.
Aye. Okay, the motion carries 5-0. And move then to item number 8 here, which is the meeting calendar for 2022. Originally, Michelle had put this on the consent calendar, but I pulled it off just so we could have a discussion of the calendar in the event anybody wanted to change any of the meetings near holidays or some of the things that we sometimes discuss. I just wanted to be sure we had a chance to hear any comments about the schedule. Anybody have any?
Make a motion. Chuck?
I'll second that. Basically, it's pretty much the same in terms of committee meetings and our regularly scheduled board meetings, right, Chuck? So any
Yes.
special meetings that come up are not included in this calendar.
Yeah, this would not include special meetings, and
Correct.
we do have a policy about having our meetings on the third Tuesday. So this does that, but sometimes the third Tuesday runs into to a holiday, Christmas or Thanksgiving or something, and I just wanted to be sure that we had a chance to review it. If there's no other, go ahead, Rob.
No, I was going to make a motion, Chuck, to accept so stated.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you made the motion, Rob, because I seconded your motion that I thought you made.
Well,
I said so moved, but Chuck was still having discussion.
we will say, yes, Rob made the motion, Virginia seconded it, and no further discussion. Let's proceed to the roll call vote, Michelle.
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Crawley,
Aye.
Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Solano,
Aye.
Director Bernstein.
Aye. Okay, thank you. I'll move then to item number 9, which includes my recommendations for appointments to our standing committees and our liaison positions. And finally, I'm proposing that we have this year 3 ad hoc committees. There's one that pertains to issues that have come up at various times, but most recently, and these were primarily in closed session, where we were talking about our hiring process, the board's hiring process for our new chief, and issues of how to be fair in what we were doing to make sure we took into account diversity, equity, and inclusion. There had been a letter the board received pertaining to that, and a number of directors had spoken about these issues, and we discussed it at some length to the extent that it actually, while the issues are certainly important, it was sort of disruptive of the primary thing we were doing. And it seemed to me to make sense for us to discuss this not as a secondary issue, but as a primary issue, and to see if there were some recommendations that could be made that would improve our processes of things the board does in general, or the things that the district does. And so I've recommended that Robert Jones serve as the chair of such an ad hoc committee, and that Virginia be on the committee as well. A second topic that had come up was the issue of water companies and water pressure. This was an issue that it appeared that this was the primary issue in terms of our ISO rating, that we had ISO 2, and that if we could get better water pressure in some areas, we could move to an ISO 1 rating, and that would be beneficial to our residents who would pay lower insurance rates as a result. And I have then said, well, it's time that we discuss this explicitly, and an ad hoc committee might be the right temporary solution to looking at it, making some recommendations to the whole board, and then perhaps going forward with something. And I've asked Jim McLaughlin to chair that, and Rob Solano to serve on that. And finally, an issue that's come up recently where it seemed that we needed more fact finding, and we needed kind of preemptively to know what we, the district, wanted to do. We appear to be having some problems with our ambulance services. The chief in his report referred to this, that some of the ambulances do not have paramedics on them. This is actually hurting the district in some cases, because we then, when there is not a paramedic, we take one of the paramedics that has responded to the call, put them on the ambulance, and now we have a unit that is a substandard unit in the district, and really shouldn't be responding to calls, and that hurts the district. And this seemed like a very important issue. I mean, I note tonight that the majority of new hires that we're looking at are paramedics, and yet we hear from AMR, our county's contractor, that they can't hire paramedics. So I think this is something that needs to be looked into. It's something that I would like to chair, and I've asked Jim McLaughlin to serve on that as well. So those are my recommendations. I don't know, I could take general comments, or we could do these one at a time, or I'm not sure what you want to do, but let me just open it up to other discussion here from board members.
Chuck?
Please, Jim.
Yeah, I just like to say, I appreciate your effort in reaching out. I believe you reached out to everyone and, solicited, preferences and input. And, I know I appreciated it very much. And, as I said, when we met, I'm happy to serve where you think, I can do the most good, where I have something to offer. So I'm happy with this, these assignments, as they relate to me. And again, thank you for your care and consideration in putting it together.
Well, thank you for mentioning it. I did make an effort and was lucky, in fact, but I made an effort to reach out to everyone. And I must say that all of the board members with whom I spoke, which was everyone, basically made the offer of serving wherever I thought best. So, I mean, people were willing to serve almost anywhere, but almost everyone had some preferences, and I was lucky enough to be able to honor everyone's first choice on this. So that worked out. And then there were a couple of, things where people hadn't mentioned a committee or whatever, but we needed somebody, and it worked out. So I feel good about the fact that everybody's first choice was honored here.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, Virginia.
Yeah, so thanks again too. I appreciate your taking into consideration, all of the input from everyone. And I do think that the 3 ad hoc committees are relevant, and I can't wait to be involved with the diversity, equity, and inclusion ad hoc committee. And as hopefully I get voted into be the liaison for the ambulance JPA, and hopefully we'll be more involved. I think it's going to be one of the most relevant issues that we deal with this year. Yeah, I don't want to be premature about this, but I would like to make a motion to approve the 2022 standing committee, liaison, and ad hoc committee appointments.
Okay, so Virginia's made a motion to accept all 3 of these. Is there a second? Rob seconded it. And Robert, I'll go to you in a minute, but I think Rob had wanted to speak after Virginia did. Is that correct, Rob?
No, I was going to second Virginia's motion, Joe.
Okay, go ahead, Robert.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
No, that's what I was mumbling to try to get it out, but Rob's hand went up quick, so I just take it back.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on the appointments? Again, Michelle, if I could get your help again on if there's any comments, public comments on any of these.
Yes, if there's any public comments, if you could please raise your hand, or you can press *9 on your phone if you called in. And I see none.
Okay, well, let's proceed then to the roll call vote.
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Crawley,
Aye.
Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Solano,
Aye.
Director Bernstein.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you all for accepting the appointments, and thank you for voting all 5-0 on all of the appointments. And so let's just be clear, we had committee meetings in January, which were the old committee membership, which was the old committee memberships. And the committees that meet as of February, the first week of February, maybe it's February 1st even, will be the newly constituted committees. And the staff support for each of those committees has a list of items that the departing or the terminating committees felt were important for the new year. So please, asking the chairs of each of the committees to get that list. One criterion I did have for the committee appointments, because I was pleased with the progress we had made last year, I tried and was successful in getting at least one member of last year's committee on the same committee. So there is not a complete turnover in any committee as of in terms of what you've just done. So there should be one veteran member there at least. And in some cases, both people are veterans. Okay, any questions about that or what's going to happen next month? So you'll need to get your agendas into Michelle in the last week of January. It's going to come up very quickly. Let's move then to the item number 10, which is a quick review of the public record process that the district uses. And this is really just a presentation so that everybody understands what the district does. And I'm not sure, Stephen, are you doing that or is Michelle going to do that? Or go ahead, Jim, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hey, Chuck, I was going to put, this was an item on the HR committee, the January HR committee.
And would you like to make a report of the committee then as part of this item?
Your pleasure.
Well, if you're prepared, I don't know who's prepared to address this, so please go ahead then.
Okay. I put it on the agenda item after receiving a request directly from a member of the public. And it caused me to look at how does a member of the public make a PRA request. And, you know, many public agencies have a spot on their website that that they can use to submit Public Record Act requests. So I saw we didn't have one, or I couldn't find one. I responded to the citizen just by saying, hey, I'm referring your request on to the chief. So that just led to a discussion at the committee with Chief Coyle, and I think a lot of that's already been resolved. You know, the chief can discuss what action he's taken, but we had some discussion about putting, you know, an access point on the website so that it can just go directly where it needs to go. So that you know, if I were approached in the future by somebody, I would simply say, go to the website. There's a portal for you to submit your claim.
Yep. Jim?
Rob?
Yeah, we also, that it was made clear that Michelle was our privacy officer, and she would be the one that would disseminate the information. And Michelle, can you just briefly say your procedure? Because it was great when you brought it up and told us at the committee level of what you do and the way you keep a log, and you refer it to, let's say if it's a issue that involves fire protection or inspection, you forward those requests to our fire marshal. If you could just briefly explain what you do. And that's why Jim and I kind of said, you know, continue with what you are doing, because you are doing a great job with it.
Thank you. Yes, so we receive a public records requests, and they come in various ways. And I keep a log of all of them. And I also keep a folder that corresponds with a number in the log. And then I determine which department or employee would be responsible for responding to the request or giving me the information so that I can respond to the request. And it's a pretty smooth process. I just email whoever. The department could be fire prevention, it could be for an inspection report, it could be for various things. So once I get the final response, I send the response to the requester, and that's usually the end of it. I keep all the documents and all the emails back and forth from myself to staff to the requester, all in their folder, so I can look back and have everything in one place. And then I also keep an Excel spreadsheet which lists all the pertinent information, who the requester was, the date it came in, the date of the response, a basic description of what was requested, and so on and so forth.
Michelle, could you just expand upon the procedure when a request comes in that might actually be problematic for someone's privacy, or might involve things that were closed session items, or might involve things for which the board is not responsible or does not keep records about?
Yeah, so if an item comes in that is of a sensitive nature, or, well, I'll say sensitive nature, then I would talk to the fire chief and most likely general counsel also to see how to proceed. Then I get feedback from them and follow through with their suggestions.
But the public record requests are not secret, so you could also talk to the person if it involves, say, a board member or a staff member. Would it be normal that you would talk to them also, or inform them of the request?
No, my first stop would be the fire chief and general counsel. And if that's what they recommended that for me to do, then I would do that.
Okay. Robert, please go ahead.
It appears to me, because I got been getting emails too, I think everybody have, from one or more people regarding getting information. Is Michelle, I guess this question goes directed towards you, because I don't know, is the process that you outline in terms of the steps that you go through in trying to accommodate an individual's request, is this memorialized somewhere in our policy, in our procedure manual, or is it memorialized those steps? One of the reasons I'm asking is that sometimes people think when they call in and they don't get what they want, this is just making up stuff. You're just doing it because you wanted to do it. And if it's more somewhere that is memorialized in the district policy somewhere or procedure somewhere, that the individual, and that's going to be on, could be on, that is online too, that a person can be directed towards that if they have any hard feelings or, you know, sense of, you know, you're not telling me the truth and blah, blah, blah. Is that somewhere in our written down anywhere? Any those procedures that you talked about in terms of accessing public records?
No, the process I described is a process that has always been done. You know, the clerk of the board always receives public records requests. The process of the spreadsheet and the folders to contain all the information for each request was something I started in 2018. Before that, there was nothing. So the process that I put in place started in 2018, and other than that, the public records requests have always come to the clerk of the board, and how the clerk handled them before me is different than I handle them now.
Through the chair, with that said, I think, and I don't know what committee should take this task on, but with Michelle help, and somewhere within our policies, within our procedures that we have, that the process needs to be memorialized or cast in concrete somewhere in place, so that it doesn't become one of people, you know, harassing Michelle or anybody who's in that position of looking this information up, or even a board member, that we can direct them to our policy around this. So, it's just one man's opinion, but I think that we need to figure out how to get this in concrete somewhere.
President Bernstein, if might I chime in for a moment?
Yes, please.
So, Director Jones, if it helps at all, the district, and I think no district have their own policies as you've described, because actually the statutes in the government code are extraordinarily specific in describing exactly within how many days one must respond under different circumstances, how many days one can ask for an extension, what are the specific types of exemptions that one can claim, what types of requests can be made, can they be oral, can they be in writing, there's really quite, it's not like the fire district could do things differently from the city of Menlo Park. They could have different policies than the city of East Palo Alto. There is the law that is quite specific, and there's a big body of law that's been built up. So your suggestion is a great one, but your procedures will essentially be what's in the government code at the end of the day, I believe.
I think not necessarily a policy, because that would, you know, don't want to get in conflict with what's already there by statute, as you say, but in terms of our own internal process, in terms of how we process information, I think that you know, to me is the key. And if I granted that there are 7 days, I mean, it's outlined in, you say, in what's already existing, but if nothing else but a one-liner in our document, in our particular policies that we can refer to, saying that we follow, what do you say, the Brown Act or state statute, that we follow the state statute and call it a day. Because I think people, for the emails that I've seen, which kind of disheartened me even to have the email, is making more of, it's the person seemed like they were kind of distrusting, what was going on. And the, I guess I sense that was a sense of, well, you're not right, you're not doing it right. There's got to be more that kind of stuff going on. So that's the only reason why I'm saying, it's, and maybe some individuals may not even, care. They just want what they want, and they're not finding it. So I'm just wondering. It just seemed like we just need to make sure that we got somewhere to point them to. We can, I guess, point them to the statute. But if it's clear in our policies, regulations somewhere that this is what we do, then people would know that we are bound by that as an institution.
But I'd like to follow up on Robert's comment, though, with you, Stephen, because it seems to me that there are some things. I don't know the law, so I'm not trying to talk about the law, but it seems that there would be some due process issues here where a request pertained to a specific individual, whether it was a board member or a staff member or something of that sort. And there must be some sort of procedures. Again, I think it would be, I know, for example, there was a recent situation that's been ongoing for several years where the chancellor of one of the community colleges and so forth was able to object to a public records request that involved his actions and so forth. Maybe could you address that and whether, I mean, it seems to me that that it would be a good idea to inform if there was anybody who was the specific subject of a request, somebody's files or something of that sort, that person should be informed of that when the request comes in.
Sure. I'm not sure. There's a lot there to unpack. Is your question whether a public records request for an individual's files requires notification of that individual? Is that your question?
Well, let me say, in the particular case that I'm referring to, I know that the individual in this case was able to object to it such that the records were not released, but that requires some sort of advance warning before they're released to be able to do such a thing.
Well, that's true. And I mean, what you're describing is what's called in the law reverse Public Records Act action, where an agency determined that particular records were public, but a particular individual sued to block the disclosure before they were produced by the agency. And you're right, that individual knew that his records were about to be released and so went to court. Yes, you're correct.
Is informing them part of a due process procedure, or it just happened that he learned of that incidentally?
It's the latter, but one can imagine that happening again. But public records are public records, period, full stop. So if there's a request for Chief Coyle's calendar, whether those are public records or not, is a public law question, not a question regarding Chief Coyle individually. So there's no due process requirement that Chief Coyle be informed of that request, although it makes perfect sense that he be informed. Sorry, Chief Coyle, I don't mean to be making up stories about you. I'm just using you as a hypothetical here.
Well, what if the request were something like the address of his personal residence?
Well, that is, I mean, we're like anything with the Public Records Act, it is very fact specific, but there is ample support for the notion that a home address is exempt from disclosure under the Public Records Act because of various privacy concerns. And there's just sort of a public interest balancing test that asks whether the value to the public of disclosing is outweighed by the value to the public of not disclosing.
I'd like to
So the district
mention,
would not disclose a fire chief's home address under almost any circumstance that I can think of.
Director Jones, I wanted to let you know also, and the rest of the board, that in your board policy manual under section 8.4, I'm sorry, there's a public records process paragraph
Okay,
you could refer to,
8.4,
8.4,
okay,
page 38.
thank you.
Okay, that's helpful because I think in May, it's on the board's regular calendar or annual calendar to look at potential revisions to our policies and procedures. And perhaps that's something, Robert, you could look into and see if you think it merits change, or all of us could look into.
Okay.
Any
Thanks,
other
Michelle.
questions or comments about this? Oh, Chief Coyle, you have your hand raised. I apologize.
Just wanted to add one little caveat. Director McLaughlin raised an excellent point. One of the things when we, after before the human resources meeting, digging into this topic and realizing that Michelle's been handling this and doing it at a very high level, we did discover that there is some room for improvement on the intranet. There is a link where you can do a PRA through a form on the intranet on our internet page. And we are in the process of having IT streamline that so that you can do it electronically and click to submit. One of the complaints from a recent PRA was that it was pretty antiquated, having to print it up, fill it out, and then fax it. So we are fixing that. And that was one of Michelle's requests to make it even better. And it is a link, Director, on the Forms and Requests tab of our webpage.
Good job.
And could I just ask a question about that? You submit that, but do we provide a list of public record requests, or this is just simply the form to make the request?
It would be an electronic form, and as Mr. Miller mentioned, you can do it in any number of forms. You can write a letter, you can walk in the front door, but having it on the website is probably the most convenient, and then it would click to submit. And my recommendation is that it would go to Michelle's email, and then for redundancy purposes, maybe a deputy or division chief also, just in case Michelle's on vacation when we get one and we don't meet our time standards. Did that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
I gotta figure out how to unraise my hand. Oh, I did. There we go.
Okay, any other questions or comments about the public records process? And Michelle, do we have any public comment or comment on this item?
Anybody has any public comments, please raise your hand, or you can press *9 on your telephone if you called in. And I see none.
Okay, I'll move to the committee reports then, item number 11. And I'll start with the Finance Committee. Everything that we discussed kind of formally was on tonight's agenda. The one item that I will mention that did come up, and it's something that I raised, and that is that we discussed some of the financial implications of the ambulance service, and I made a recommendation that we send a bill to AMR for the times we have put paramedics on ambulances, because AMR is charging the people that ride on those ambulances full price for ALF service. And we are providing an important component of the ALS service. And to not send a bill and collect on it would be a gift of public funds to AMR, which is a private organization, and I think is against the rules. So that's something that I would like to pursue is on the Finance Committee, but I just wanted to make the board aware of that.
Chuck, can I add something?
Please do.
So when I brought up the ambulance JPA issue last month, we did not as a board, look at the financial implications. So what you and I talked about also was just putting that issue in general on the Finance Committee agenda. mainly because, we want to understand, the whole subsidy versus reciprocity issue for ambulance service as well. So just an FYI, that is something that we want to bring over from this month's committee to next month's committee agenda, if that makes sense. So just so the board knows, I think what Chuck brought up is more specific, but I think that and correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck, that we were going to look at this as an issue in general, the financial implications of the ambulance situation in the county.
Yeah, so that's correct.
Question, Chuck. In looking, are you guys expecting to look at it, the data behind the requests in terms of how often this happened, how many people we're talking about that we're having to assist, that type of data in terms of information, because I think it'd be helpful to kind of really understand. That'll help with the true magnitude of the problem. If it's if it's 1 or 2, do we take a real firm stance, or if it gets into more than that, then I think the numbers are going to really tell how much is leaking out of our district that could be recaptured for other things.
Let me say 2 things. We discussed it in general and without specific data, but we were led to believe that this was a fairly frequent occurrence. And in some ways, I think the extent to which it damages our readiness or takes a unit out of service is really more in the purview of the Emergency Preparedness Committee than the Finance Committee. But the Finance Committee was the cost of having a unit out of service, or the cost of providing something, or in a sense, giving a free good to AMR that I don't think we're authorized to give.
So Robert, let me just expand on that just a little. 2 years ago, when this issue was brought up, we received, I think, as we were trying to figure out, what the contract looked like, because the county wanted us to basically rubber stamp a 20-year contract. So there were 4 different agencies, or I'm sorry, 4 different chiefs and other elected officials across the county that looked at this issue. And we received this spreadsheet. Dan, I don't know if you have access to it, that has the FRU numbers, the reimbursement numbers. And I think at that time that was for 2018, 2019. So for, I think, the Finance Committee meeting, at least, I would like to see any updated spreadsheets that are available with those numbers for 2020 to 2021. Or any, whatever the latest would be, if there's a way we can get that. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. But we had these spreadsheets 2 years ago with all of these numbers. And I think that we're entitled to get that. And I think the public's entitled to see that as well. So I would like to have that as a starting point for the Finance Committee, so we understand the magnitude from that starting point. Right. And maybe even compare it to what it was like in 2018, 2019. I don't know, but at least we have to start from somewhere. And so I'd like the latest on that. Chuck, does that make sense for you?
Yes.
And maybe, Robert, that might be a good starting point for us to even understand any of this.
Well, yeah. How can we make a decision about something we don't understand what the true magnitude is? If it's 1 or 2, do we get excited about it? If it's 50 or 100, and that's on every month, then yeah, I mean, you can get kind of excited when what's happening here. So the data is so important, and kind of for us to look at, so we can kind of make a decision.
And I would also say that we should look at some of the relevant contract provisions, because I do think that AMR may have, as I was worried about 2 years ago, not fulfilled part of its contract. So anyway, those were my concerns, and we kind of briefly touched on that in general, as Chuck said. So Chuck, that's what I'm requesting for our finance committee meeting in February.
Okay, and let me ask the Chief Coyle to, if you could just summarize in a couple sentences the availability of the data and the likely, I mean, you made it sound, I think, that this data was readily available and that we knew how frequently this occurred. Is that, you don't need to present the data now, but if just how available is it?
I will look into that tomorrow. Every Thursday, as I think I've already stated, the fire chiefs are meeting to talk about ambulance services. And of course, right now, the hot topic is how COVID has impacted that. I do want to make sure I'm clear about one thing. It is not rampant by any means. For a long time in the JPA, the fire-based paramedics will assist even on an ALS ambulance if you have a critical patient or a person in labor or a shooting victim or something like that. We often send our paramedics with the AMR paramedics just to improve the service. Somebody can do airway while somebody else is doing medications, et cetera. There was a brief episode in November where they kind of changed the rules on us a little bit. And what they started doing was sending BLS ambulances to code 2 medical calls. In other words, trying to preserve their number of ALS ambulances. And we had a rash of our engine company paramedics assisting BLS ambulances to the hospital. The county fire chiefs were jumped on that like as fast as you can imagine. And that was reversed almost immediately. But I think there was about a 3-day period where we had, I'd say, half a dozen BLS ambulances. And one of those happened to be for a psych patient that went to San Mateo General. So we lost engine 3 for an hour and a half. And immediately at the time, it was Chief Schaefer and Melanie jumped all over it, and Chief Myers from North County. And that was sort of the impetus for this sort of magnifying glass that we have on the topic now, to make sure that something like that doesn't occur again. I believe their intent was pure. They were trying to, we were saying, hey, we need ALS ambulances. So they were trying to not have ALS ambulances on routine BLS calls to preserve those ambulances. But what that meant is that we were losing fire engine companies or truck companies taking patients to the hospital, which is not our primary mission. We're happy to help out when needed, but they certainly shouldn't be leaning on us like that. So it hasn't happened in a couple of weeks where we had a BLS ambulance directors, but I will try to get that data for you. And Director Crawley, I'm unfamiliar with that spreadsheet, but I will look into that tomorrow and try to get an update. And I would imagine we should have that readily available. That seems like it should be.
So Dan, I actually have a copy, not a copy. I took a picture of it. I don't have the actual copy anymore. I can send it to you because then you'll know what you're looking for.
Please
and that
do.
was from 2018, 2019. I think Jim may even have that. I think the whole board may have had that at one point.
And if I can't make headway on my own, I will bring it up to the county chiefs. Obviously, every one of them is more seasoned than I and has been through this longer, so they may be able to point us in the right direction. I'll just ask if we can get a JPA update on the data as to how many times BLS ambulances were used in the 911 system and took patients to the hospital. And in-house, we keep track also. Anytime that we get a BLS ambulance, that email goes to myself and Melanie and all the battalion chiefs. And that's the reason why I can say it has not happened in probably at least a week and a half.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me go to Emergency Preparedness Committee. Robert, you want to summarize?
I'm going to defer to Virginia since she was a chairperson at the last meeting. So I'm going to defer this meeting to her.
Thanks, Robert. Yes. So basically what the main thing that we covered today was the constant report. And I think there were the concerns that the board of directors brought up today is something that we need to kind of go back to the table and look at. So thank you for that. And in anticipation of the fact that we'd probably have to look at the constant report and, listen, get more public input if necessary. We decided that for the ambulance JPA issue, that issue should not necessarily lie in the EPREP committee. I think last month after I brought up the issue, the board directed that 2 committees look at this, the EPREP committee and strategic planning. And, I think that given what we're supposed to be doing on the EPREP committee, the ambulance JPA, I think is not as relevant to that committee as it would be for strategic planning, possibly HR and finance. So since this issue will be in finance, which it wasn't in before, and possibly the HR committee, and will probably stay in the strategic planning committee, depending on what the rest of the board wants. Robert and I thought that, it didn't make sense to keep that in the emergency preparedness committee. Did I summarize that okay, Robert?
Yeah, you
I
did a
think
good
that's-
job. You did a good job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chuck?
Yes, Jim, please.
This would be a good time to bring up my issue. I would ask, Virginia and Robert, this, the consultant's report, is it still considered a draft? Is it final? Have we accepted it? And
Well, if the board say it's accepted, then accepted, but as far as, I think that didn't happen today. As far as we didn't, there were some good things and not so good things. So I think they are through with it for sure. They said that they have done, I assume, Virginia, you're gonna have to help me, but as far as they're concerned, this is their baby. They presented it to us, and what we do with it next, I think, is really, it's kind of wide open at this point. I didn't hear that we accepted the report. There was no vote on it.
So
or
Jim?
application of it.
I don't think it's ready. Again, I already voiced it. I don't, I'm one of five, but I don't accept it, or I don't think it should be published and distributed. It's
So Jim, what we talked about just very briefly was to have the board look at what this product was. Basically, the board directed this to go back to EPREP, and the EPREP committee said, oh, well, it's time to, at least present it to the board for input as well. So I think that we know that there needs to be more input and some work. But in terms of the actual contract from Constant and Associates, their work is done. So what we do with that as a board, it's up to us right now, which is the reason that we wanted to keep that part in the EPREP committee and kind of take out the ambulance JPA part out of the EPREP committee. Because I think that there are going to be more concerns about the constant report than we thought. Does that make sense?
sure. Thank you.
One of the things that I noted in the report, which it goes back to the heart of, concerns that individual CERT groups had around the relationships and the result, what's going to happen, once the report comes out. And I think there's some timing issues that's in there in terms of those priorities. I think that the cart is before the horse, or vice versa, in terms of the actual impetus of the report was, from what I understood, was to kind of look at the community relationship and how that's working and not working. What is the district doing to enhance that or improve upon it, based upon the strategic plan that was put out some time ago, or the conversation over the last couple of years of what's broken between the community and the fire district. Wasn't quite clear to me as what would be the plan. The other, on one side of the picture, they answered the question, I think, very well when they start looking at working with jurisdictions and what it would take to try to make that aspect of it work. But in terms of this community part, this CERT group, and bringing that, how to mold that into a viable force, the emergency office management here is doing certain pieces of it already. But I think that there's a major part of it. I think it's building a CERT volunteers, a team of CERT volunteers, both in the jurisdiction where they live, as well as throughout the county, that can respond effectively to a disaster. And that's the key piece that I haven't seen in the report that brings that together. So those are things that I'm hoping that we can flush out and get clarity on and develop priorities, because the priority that was there, to me, it's some of it, the community stuff is down the road in a year. And that needs to be upfront. You know, we need to fix that. Because if the community group volunteer service groups are not to be looked at or be a part of this, the disaster preparedness, then we need to take our hands off of it and say, we're only going to work with this jurisdiction. And I don't think that's what people wanted. I think they want to be a partnership somehow. Just my
Chuck,
opinion.
if I may,
Yes, please, Jim.
you know, I think, you know, I think this almost needs to be handled like a grand jury report. You know, we commissioned this, it's been released, it's out in the public domain. I feel like it needs some kind of response from the district. Again, I feel like we as a board should distance ourselves from it. In the interest of time, I didn't cite everything that I had objections to, but I had a lot more objections than the few that I presented, where I think these broad sweeping representations are made without foundation, and I don't think represent, you know, I don't think they're accurate, and I don't think they really represent where we are as a board or a district. I think I think we should be distancing ourselves from this report. So I would ask the committee to consider that. How do we accomplish that? Because I don't think we can rewrite the report at this time. They regard it as a finished product, but I do think we should go on record saying, yeah, that this does not represent you know, the view of the board or so I'll stop.
If I could just jump in, I'm sorry, Director Ciancarelli, but this was an item that had considerable public interest that was agendized that you've now moved on from. You might consider re-agendizing this for another meeting or sending this to a committee and then to be reported back. But I feel compelled to jump in a little bit because this discussion is not just a report from a committee, which is what the topic of the agenda item of this meeting is at this point.
Well, but you know, Steve, really the report from this committee is that it is something that the committee is going to continue looking at. So Jim, thanks for that input. I agree. But so the point is, I agree, Steve, but the point is that the committee is looking at this and we're foregoing looking at the JPA, the ambulance JPA issue in that committee, which is what the board directed that committee to look at last month when I brought up the issue.
Let me just ask though, to not discuss the substance of the matter, but discuss this as an agenda item and so forth. It seems to me, and it's how I would proceed, but I'd like to hear from others that we should probably have a study session to discuss this, perhaps after the Emergency Preparedness Committee has had a chance to talk about it. And by study session, I mean not something where we would take action, but we would simply discuss it, talk about different ideas, and then talk about next steps. It could be a separate meeting, or it could be something where we set aside, let's say, as much as 1 hour on our regular agenda and just talk about a subject. But I'm curious.
So why don't we have the E-Prep committee look at that and then go from there?
It is on your agenda and you'll do that, but let's
Yeah.
talk about the steps after that then. Rob,
Right.
Rob, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, just like we had before, Chuck, when we had a study session and brought these volunteer groups in. Now, I'd like to know what the progress has been with all these other volunteer groups since we had that last meeting when Harold was still chief, and get the feedback from those groups to see, you know, is this OEM process more receptive? Because reading that report, you know, as Jim had, and I know that you had also, and well, all of us here at the board had some questions about the report, that, you know, I'd like to get that feedback again from all these volunteer groups that depend on, you know, not only the district for financing and training and hand out materials, but see, you know, where they are with their individual communities, Menlo Park, Atherton, and East Palo Alto, and of course the county, see how supportive they are. I know ADAPT is very supportive with Atherton, but I'd really like to know the progress between EPA and Menlo Park and the county. So those are a lot of questions that I have. You know, the report is very generic as far as I'm concerned, and basically scrapes the surface as to what we really need to do relative to this and coordinate it. So
Okay.
I think that's a good idea, Chuck, to have a special study session.
Okay, I will make an effort and discuss with the chief how we would do that and so forth. And certainly include the volunteer groups as part of it. Yes,
So
Virginia.
you might want to, I don't know, there's the study session and I don't want to get too far off into the future, or even a possible public workshop, which probably would allow more public input, but double check with the chief and with Steve as to what the difference is.
Yes, that's what I ask you.
To me,
How you define the difference, Virginia, because I'm not sure I do know the difference.
Chuck, I'm sorry, go ahead, Virginia.
Robert.
No, I think, oh no, go ahead. Robert.
I think we don't want to get too far out ahead of ourselves and end up in the same position it was before the study came. The study got commissioned. I think it's important to me because, again, I'm a person that like, process, and I like to see metrics of what I'm doing, what I'm trying to accomplish. And somewhere along the line that this report, there was some metrics created around what they were going to look at, and it got signed off on, and they went that direction. And so now what we have is based upon what was signed off on. What I'm proposing, I'm hoping that we do as an EPREP committee or as a board is to look back upon what is the criteria that we really wanted to measure, and did we achieve that particular objective? And I've been looking around through the documents I have with all of the proposals that came through to trying to understand that they really understand that one criteria. For me, it was only one criteria, things to look at, and everything flowing from there. Not only communication between the district and the community, but also what are we going to do to help enhance the community to become better prepared in their area for disaster? And so, that's not flowing out of, there are certain pieces of it, but I think the core is that really how we're training and preparing and measuring whether the community volunteers are moving in a direction that's going to get them prepared, irregardless of whether the city's involved at all, or whether the city wants to say, hey, we want to DSW you guys, we want you to be part of our family. Irregardless of that, certain volunteers are always going to be individuals that self-deploy when there's a disaster. And so how are we preparing them for that? That's the piece that I don't read the report twice already. I'm gonna go back again to kind of understand where that's going to happen within this time frame that they have set up. So
Well,
anyway,
could I recommend then, Robert, rather than trying to take this up, even though it's something I'd like to see happen very quickly, rather than take it up at our February meeting, if you could, at your February meeting, talk about not only the issue, but also the process of the board's involvement, and bring that to our board in February, then we could plan whatever the next step is, and whether you call it a workshop or you call it a study session or whatever. If you could make a recommendation. I mean, Virginia has some ideas, you have some ideas, both of you are on that committee. And it seems like you could bring back to us a number of recommendations that we could discuss at our next meeting.
okay. That's a workable thing for the board. Yeah, we could do that.
Okay.
Right, Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were both on the grand jury before, Robert. So I hear you, Jim.
Yeah, I've been on there, so I understand.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. So we haven't heard from HR yet. Jim, you were the former chair of that, is that correct?
Yeah, the two items that we discussed, found their way into the meeting tonight, so I really don't have anything to add.
Okay, and then there's strategic planning. Rob, you were ahead of that.
Yeah, well, we went over the management audit and inspection with Manny, and Manny is going to come up with the board participation aspect of that. And he'll report back to the board. Well, actually report back to our committee, and then whatever nexus that he comes up with, we'll bring it to the entire board for their review. If you can add anything else, Chuck, that'd be great.
No, I don't. I think I'd hoped that we could have discussed it tonight, but it was not, apparently it wasn't ready to be discussed tonight.
Right.
We need to get going on that whole thing quickly.
Yep. That's another thing we kept asking, right? When's it going to be done?
That's the kind of thing that in the proposal, they're going to get it done in 6 to 8 months. And then when the proposal comes in, they're going to get it done in 9 to 12. I mean, when the final comes in, it's going to be done in 9 to 12 months. And we sort of
Right.
said, no, 6 to 8 months. And maybe we can get progressive reporting. In other words, if you've got 4 components to it, maybe you do one component 1 month and the next component the next month and so forth. So we can get this as it's ready to go, because we need to use this information. I hope we can use this information as part of the budget process.
Right. Thank you, Chuck.
That's all the committee reports. Then there's the reports and requests of directors. And I'm,
What about liaison reports? Number 12?
thank you, Michelle. I did jump over that. Thank you. Are there any liaison reports?
Not for me.
Nope.
Okay. Let's move on then to the reports and requests of directors. And I see you in a certain order on my screen. So Rob, I'll start with you. Did you have anything you wanted to report or request?
Well, in our packet, Jim and myself had gone by the Hermosa fire and had spoken to one of the neighbors there, and he had written an email to me and Jim, basically praising the firefighters that responded to that fire. And Jim and I thought it was very important that it was included in our packet to show the professionalism and the hard work that our firefighters did do in that neighborhood. He was very concerned that his house was going to catch on fire. And he said that the firefighters that came out did a great job. And on the 8th, I went out to the drill site there at PG yard, and the cadaver dogs were out there. And I had saw the presentation that they did on the 8th. So that's all I have to report, Chuck. Thank you.
That raises a question for me, and I'm sorry, I meant to ask this of the chief when he was talking about, he did his report, but it's relevant to this item too. In the chief's report, Chief, you mentioned that AMR showed up at the Hermosa fire, and I was curious to know why that was.
Yeah, when I was a battalion chief, I would almost always request an ambulance for working structure fires. AMR was not very agreeable to that, not just for the public, but for our people working. I was the incident commander when we had a truck captain fall through the roof into a burning attic, and I had to call for an ambulance. And of course that took, 5-8 minutes or whatever to get there. They've recently updated the structure fire type code at dispatch, and now all structure fires automatically get an ambulance assigned, which I am a huge fan of. A friend of mine in Sacramento was a truck captain, and he was burned in the first 30 seconds. And when they got him out of the house, the ambulance, because Sacramento actually runs their own ambulances. So the fire ambulance was in the front yard to put them in the back and use at the burn center within 15 minutes or something like that. So it is now standard practice. Any structure fire type code automatically gets an ambulance, and also hazardous materials responses as well. And that's an OSHA thing. If you're doing an IDOH entry for hazardous materials, you have to have an ambulance on dedicated standby. And I'd say probably about 1.5 years ago, they changed the model here in the county. We get an ambulance automatically on structure fire. So for example, today we had the ambulance there in Atherton for probably an hour. And, they don't like that because we're tying up one of their ALS ambulances, and they don't, thank God they don't actually get a transport out of it.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. That's interesting information. So I'll go down, and Rob, that was all of your requests and so forth? You were reporting request of director. You mentioned the correspondence, nothing more than to report? I don't know if he can hear me or not.
You talk to me or Rob?
I meant Rob. Were you done, Rob, with your report?
Yes, I was. I thanks, Chuck. Yeah,
I
thank you.
apologize.
No worries. I mean, we could get confused anyway,
Virginia, what about you? You're on mute right now. Okay.
Yeah, I don't really have anything except I'll just reiterate my request for the chief to please get us that AMR, the spreadsheet for the ambulance stuff, the information, the FRUs, reimbursements, all of that.
Okay.
That's really all I've got. I'm very concerned about the issue.
Jim?
Nothing, Chuck. Thank you.
You said earlier that you had something for that, but I assume that was the issue about the constant report that you were going to.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
And can I just say for you, I don't want to get into the substance, but I think I was trying to be more presidential today in terms of my demeanor, but I was very disappointed in the report also. And so I second your concern about it. Robert, do you have any report or requests?
No, I have none. I'll take that back. I know we had talked about the 35 employees that were out with COVID, and that there have been improvements on that. And it appears to me that I just, would love to get a little bit of handle on the metrics on that, in terms of number of people that actually, not necessarily, just keeping an eye on, the ebb and flow, and whether people are actually, the firefighters getting this out in the public, or they bringing it home into the fire district. Because I'm like, if they're bringing it home into the fire district, I think some type of testing on a daily basis may have to take place. If they go out on a call, maybe they get tested when they come back from these calls, somewhere along the line, to try to, to curb, to make sure this doesn't flare back up again. And I don't know where to start. So anyway, just a comment, thoughts.
Director Jones, can I address that very quickly?
Sure.
One thing I forgot to mention is we initially, since the test kits were sort of a valuable commodity, we were not testing people before they left work to go home. Obviously, that would have been really nice to do. We actually changed that philosophy, and we are allowing guys who want to be tested before they go home to their families to do that, so they're not going back to their families and bringing it home, as you stated, but also not to be selfish, but if we can start the clock on their isolation time, when they leave to go home for 4 days, that's less work that they're going to miss. So if we need to isolate a person for 5 days because they tested positive, or for the illness to run its course, if we identify that when they're leaving to go home for their days off, those days count towards our isolation time, rather than waiting for them to come back to work, testing them and then having them off for potentially, more than one tour, more than one 40-hour shift. So we are allowing guys to test before they leave, testing people directly after what we call EMD positive calls. In other words, patients with symptoms or signs that are consistent with COVID. There's a lapse time before they would even test positive if they were exposed or did contract.
And not to sound like a dad or someone who's over over someone, looking down their nose all the time. But it appears to me that they would probably, the firefighters might, if they got to go home to someone, they probably really need to know that before they get home. And so testing, it looks like it's getting to the point of an imperative kind of a situation for not only for them, but for their family and for us as a district, because the more people that are out, I don't know what that do with the workflow, but it can impede. I'm sure having 35 people out can kind of slow down work a little bit. So it's almost getting to the point, and I'm hoping that it doesn't, getting to going back to the comment that Chuck made earlier, that we may have to mandate that this, guys get tested and ladies get tested, people get tested. You don't want to. I've been resisting that part, but the numbers, we just got to look at the numbers, and one person getting COVID is as bad as having 35, as far as I'm concerned. So, just got. I'm hoping that I don't know what to do with that conversation, other than saying, let's keep an eye on it, and let's get. And I would love to have the data on that, if nothing else, once a month, keeping us abreast of how that's going.
Yeah, I would imagine that will probably be a regular item in the fire chief's report, just to give you, the governing body updates on our numbers as that ebbs and flows, I'm sure as it will. We have 2,800 kits that were supposed to arrive today. They were actually supposed to arrive about 10 days ago. And you can imagine FedEx's excuses are all COVID related. Their drivers and their warehouse personnel and everything else. So I looked at the tracking, and actually says due to show up today. And I don't think it's going to show up at this point, but we should have quite a few more test kits that we actually bought right around the 30th of December that we're supposed to be here within 5 days, but here we're going on 18 days and we still don't have them. So that would give us the luxury of testing people more frequently before they go home. It would be less of a concern. And one other item that just popped into my head, we did actually help the dispatch center. The supervisor of the dispatch center called and asked if we could help them out with some testing. Again, because if you test people, the people that were considered exposures do not need to go isolate. So we actually tested some of the dispatchers because they were getting pretty close to having operational impacts as far as answering the calls, processing the calls, dispatching our units. And so I figured that was as much of a concern for us. And if we could help them out and help them continue to do their jobs, that was better for our community as well. So on Sunday, actually, I believe Chief Pimentel on his day off went over to the dispatch center with test kits and took care of them.
Yeah, because it's two-way street. Because you go out there, we may be taking something out there to the community, and we don't want to do that either. So, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that too with just a couple comments. One is, and this is not a criticism, it's just kind of a call to be alert. On Christmas Eve day, I went to all the fire stations and delivered fruit, as I have in the past, to each of the fire stations. And it was nice to be able to talk to people and say hello and so forth. But I did notice in more than several stations, people were not routinely wearing masks. And that is something that's required by law. And I don't know how to monitor that or whatever. I hope that there's a greater awareness now that you've had all these cases there, because we do have an obligation under both federal OSHA and Cal OSHA to have safe workplaces. And Chief, you mentioned that this was kind of an aggressive position to test everybody, but I don't think testing is aggressive when you're dealing with the kind of fragile people that we deal with and health compromised people and so forth. I think it's a very reasonable thing to do. So I don't think we should be shy about doing it. And I applaud you for taking those steps. I wish we could go even further.
No, Chuck. So I actually delivered things to the weekend before Christmas, and every place I went, everyone was wearing a mask. Okay. So I don't know what happened, but I just want to put that out there.
I was going to say one other thing about that. Oh yeah, just this is unrelated. Yeah, sorry, that's all my report, but I do have a president's report Very short. And I was just going to say that I am enormously optimistic by what we can do this coming year. I feel that we have a new chief coming in that has expertise in two of the most critical areas we have to look at, that is ambulance service and what's the other one? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm blank on it, but also expertise in fleet maintenance, which is something that we care about. I know dispatch was the area that I wanted to mention. So I think that he can be a resource to the county, but he can also help us understand how we're going to navigate some of the problems we're running into. I feel like we're getting reports on areas that are important, even though I wasn't pleased with the constant report. I think it started the public discussion of these matters, and this is important. I think the management audit is going to be important. I think the looking at some of these issues before budget time so that we can actually factor them into the budget. Obviously, the constant report recommended, which I don't agree with, but at this point, but the recommended increasing the staffing for OEM and so forth. But that's, at least we have time to consider these things rather than, having to decide something in the next 20 minutes because we've got to publish it. So anyway, I think we have the possibility of really tackling important issues this year, and I'm looking forward to it. And I just want to thank all of you for your observations and contributions and so forth. Chief Coyle, I appreciate some of the information that you and Francine as well have been able to give to the board. So I think we've made a good start, and I appreciate that. That's all I wanted to say. Are there any? I'm going to move to public comment, but is there any last items that before we move to public comment? Okay, Michelle, is there any public comment?
If there's any public comments, please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone. And I see none.
Okay. The last item then, we've got the information on it, but the adjournment is our last item. I think we were informed by either our general counsel or our clerk that we don't need a motion to adjourn. I think if we don't need to, there's no reason to take even the 2 minutes that it takes to do the roll call and so forth. But if somebody would like to have motions at the end, we can certainly do that. I don't want to deprive of that process. Any reason to do that, or can I just say there's no more items and we're adjourned?
You can adjourn the meeting from a legal perspective. There's no need for a motion to adjourn. In fact, even if you don't adjourn the meeting, if a majority of the board leaves, the meeting is effectively adjourned. So there's really no need for a motion.
Okay, well, let's dispense with the motion then. We've got lots of motions tonight. We accomplished a lot, and I think we accomplished it before 10 o'clock. It's 1 minute to 10. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I'll see you in a month and at committees sooner than that.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks.
Good night.
Right.